Welcome, artist, and thank you for joining me in my channel. My name is Maria Contreras. This is Artist Life. Today we will be working on this beautiful cat. This is my cat named Tobi-rama. This is my daughter's cat hanging out in my son's room today. I am working on pet portraits and refining those, and so today we're going to be looking at fur and building layers in fur. This is a time-lapse video. It does take us a few minutes to get this done. And so I had to shorten that time down for us. If there's anything that you'd like to know or any questions that you have, go ahead and drop me a line in the comments or go to my Facebook page, M.A. Contreras Artist Life, and check me out there. You can leave comments on my page as well, or share your portrait if you happen to try to paint along with me today. You can always drop the speed back down to help you if you're going to decide to paint this video. So thank you again, and we're going to go ahead and get started today. You're going to see some painting that is going to get done, and we're going to start with tracing in charcoal just because this takes a lot of time, and I wanted to make sure that my cat was rather accurate. So I did have a printout of my picture, and I'm going to go ahead and show you how to trace that on there today. All right, so what you're watching here is the tracing part of the video. I used charcoal to go over the back, then I flipped it around, taped it to the top of my canvas board, and I'm just tracing it, periodically lifting to ensure that I can see the tracing underneath, and then just going over it a little bit so that I can have a decent lines as I'm getting to work here. Okay, so we're going to be putting our palette together. I am using a tempered gray glass palette, and I do have a Master's Touch Stay Wet box that I've been placing it in. I just got that for my birthday. We're putting on our black, our white paint, our burnt sienna, yellow ochre, magenta, cad red, cad yellow, gloss glazing liquid, burnt umber, phthalo blue, and we're going to go ahead and set out our brushes. Now the brushes may vary, but Silver Sterling Studio has a number 6 bright, 2 bright, a 3.0 round. I custom cut that 6 bright, and then a few other brushes that went across the screen. I'm going to get started on the background. We're using phthalo blue, some phthalo green mixed together to get a darker toned color. I'm using complementary colors than from what is on the board, since she's largely a kind of like a gray orange tabby cat. I wanted to have a complementary color in the background, so I chose more of a blue to a blue green. I'm using my burnt umber and the burnt sienna to paint in the darks. We want to make sure that we know where our shadows are, our midtones, and then eventually our highlights. I'm throwing a little bit of the phthalo blue and green in there to darken that umber a little bit more, where I see some really high contrast. As we continue putting in those darks, making sure that I look at her striping, seeing where the lightest areas, throwing in some yellow ochre there in some of her lighter areas, especially around her belly, where we're going to be seeing some of the light from the sun that's coming in from that window, and putting in the contours and the facial planes that we see there. Planes are very important. You want to see where the light hits and bounces off, and then opposite area where shadows would be on there. And since this light is coming kind of off to her side towards the back, we do have she's much darker to the left side, and then she's much more brighter to the right side. So putting in a lot of yellow ochre there to make sure that we show those brights. Now going into some areas with some of the burnt sienna, doing a little bit of midtones. I am using a filbert brush here for this from the Silvermark Simply Cements Extra Large brand. I like to use those. They're a little bit of a stiffer bristle on them, especially for the underpainting. It kind of really gets the paint in there. This is going to be happening in multiple layers. So this is currently the underpainting, and I just want to see all the contrast with the lights and the dark. I am mixing in some white and using that gloss glazing liquid just to get some nice blends in there. Because we are going to have to start softening that fur, and so that glazing liquid, especially in the heat here where I live, really dries things out fast because we're constantly running the AC here. Okay, building up all over. So whenever I'm putting lights or new colors, you don't want to stick to just one area. You want to make sure that you're putting those lights and using that paint in all the areas where has that same value, so that the painting looks cohesive. On a bit, I'm going to put in her eyes and her eye sockets just so that she has a little bit of life to her already. I switched to the Silver Touch little brush, the Filbert over there, putting in some fine lines. I liked that flat one. It gave me the ability to kind of make finer lines there, and then I can still kind of turn it around and flatten in those areas where her eye sockets are. Using quite a bit of darks, defining underneath her chin and making sure I separate her face from the rest of her neck and body. Going back in with she's got some beautiful yellow green eyes, so making those darker tones with the phthalo blue and the phthalo green, getting some of that yellow and making sure that I lighten it up and bring it in there because her eyes are more yellow green. I'm bringing in as much more yellow as I can, and then I'll put that green back up in there. Adding tiny little bits of white, putting in on the slits in her eyes, using that burnt umber, and then I'll darken those out. I am pulling out the liner or the rigger brush just to make some thinner, finer lines and have a little bit more control. This area is very finely detailed, so we want to make sure that we have as much control as possible. Rounding those eyes out, making sure that we're shadowing the corners and the inside of the eye. Now the inside of, if you're looking at her left eye is going to be darker and the outside will be lighter. And then her right eye, if you're looking at her, that inside is going to be slightly brighter than the other side would be because the light is coming from off to the left. Okay, using that same detail brush and moving over to the fur, trying to put in some fine points there, and then defining her nose with a little bit of magenta, some cad red, and some cad yellow in there, just to make sure that we have a lighter tone. Now I switched over to the magenta Naples and her ears, painting in the fine pink in her ears because the light, she's very translucent on her ears. The light is shining through there, and so we want to be able to project that light that's coming in. So making sure that we're putting in some nice highlights there to show how light and translucent those ears are. Bringing in some more yellow in there, lightening and brightening it up. Okay, I switched back over to the filbert in the fur area, and I'm putting in some much lighter fur. She does have white underneath the fur coat, and so she's got a lot of texture. She's got this lighter undercoat, and then she's got the mix of the tabby, so she has these wonderful, tiger stripes going through her, but she's also got a calico, so she's got areas where she's a little more splotchy orange or a little bit grayer. She's got a little bit more blue, especially around her legs and her feet, and then some redder tones go in there as well. So she just has a lot of color. She definitely took a lot more, is taking a lot more of my skill and my time than my other kitten Raja did. Raja was pretty much a white and gray and blue cat, and a little bit of, yellow in there, but not too much. Toby's a challenge. So I was having a little bit of trouble with the texture on the canvas. I think if I do um, my other cat next, I'm going to probably gesso and maybe sand the canvas so not so much texture shows through. Sometimes it works for me, sometimes it works against me. In this particular case with Toby, because she had so many fine differences in her hair and her fur, it was working against me a little bit. So I oranged up some of her tones there and put a base under it, and then I kind of put some white and peached up a little bit towards the top. She does have a lighter belly going on, and some really bright highlights on her paws and then her belly area. Now I'm brightening up the chest area a little bit brighter than what the photograph showed. The photograph had a very high contrast, but I do want to showcase all of Toby's beautiful fur. So we are lightening that up a little bit more than the picture shows. And as the artist, we can do that. You know, we have that freedom there. You can see me putting in some of that phthalo blue and blending it in, getting it more of a neutral gray in there, working that in with some of the burnt sienna and burnt umber. I have touched the black a little just because there's some areas that just really need to be dark, but I am refraining from mixing the black and the white together. I don't want to dull out her colors, but I do want to show them off. I do want to show some darker areas and some lighter areas. I'm darkening up the background a little bit, and I'll continue doing this a couple of times, just glazing. The phthalo is a little transparent, especially in these lower grade acrylics that I was using. I was using Liquitex Basics, Master Touch, some of the Artist Loft line. Again, it's just practice for me, and so they're a softer touch and a little more transparent. I am on the toe of this filbert here, and that's the very, very tip or edge of the brush. Just imagine your feet and your toes and tiptoeing, making sure that I keep my hands really far back on the bristle, or at least halfway, so I'm not pushing down too hard, and kind of keeping that soft look. Now I switched over to one of the comb brushes that I pulled out of a set. I hadn't used these before, so I'm really on a learning curve here, kind of turning them to the side, trying to get different patterns on there so that it doesn't look really really patterned and generic. If you keep using the brush in the same way, you're going to start seeing these lines and patterns, and it's not going to look really natural. So I'll turn it, I'll twist it, I'll go to the corner, raise it a little bit higher just to put in a nicer texture. And I'm going back and forth in the color, just adjusting to her fur pattern, making sure that if I go too light, I darken it back up again. And I had to switch out palettes here. This took me about 5 hours to do over a couple of days. So I am using some acrylics from that plastic palette that had started to kind of gel up and dry out. So I'm a lot of water there. And then in a little while, I'll add some fresh acrylic again and start going through there. It's imperative that you, one, have a lot of liquid on your brush, not so much that you're dripping off, but for fur, you need to have really smooth paint. And so mine kind of was getting goopy, and I am constantly stopping to add water to it. And I think I got frustrated a couple of times, and then I realized, oh yeah, go get some water. Let's make this a little bit softer and easier. And then cleaning your brush often, even if you feel like I just, mix this beautiful color. Yes, you did. Scrape enough, get the palette knife, scrape it off a bit, and then go wash your brush, and you'll see how much better and how much crisper those lines are, especially for fur. When I get back into the the thinner rounds, the smaller the 3.0 and the 2 and the 1 that I was using later in the fine liner, you really want to clean your brush out quite often just to make sure that the paint isn't getting up into the ferrule and spreading your bristles out, because they'll start to splay out and then you won't get that nice crisp line anymore. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and switch over to and then on my number 4 round, I'm going to put in some smaller fur and the lines on the front of her chest. And I actually believe this is my number 2 round. Staying very light on the toe of the brush so we can see some of that bristles there. Going light, covering it up with a little bit of a darker tone. I'm going to go more orangey on this a little bit later. I'm adding out a little bit of fresh paint there, using my palette knife to kind of mix a few colors in. I want that really pretty orange that I was talking about. Nice clean brush. Getting some nice tone in there, and then I'll add that to a few other spots just to help it be a little bit more cohesive, because again, you know, she has different colors all over her, and so that orange is not just in that one spot. Softening up some of the color, putting in a little bit of the gray in there because I want to make sure that I'm still showing some of those mid-tones and giving a nice spot for the highlights that are going to come in. Highlighting some of her fur. Now fur, it's very important that you paint in the direction that the fur is going. So if you need to move and change your brush, make sure you're paying attention to where that fur is coming from and where it's traveling, the direction it's traveling into. I am in a smaller, thinner brush. I believe this was my 0 in this particular line. Putting in some very, very dark brown, and I did get into the black here to really darken up that side because it is in shadow. She has a beautiful white muzzle that was really highlighted with the light that was coming in through that window. And then I want to drop in some of the shading and shadow for where her whiskers are going to eventually come out. You'll see I'm slowly building in some of those shadows, those darks, bringing some of those lights in. And I do adjust it several times. This is my, well, technically 3rd. I did draw and paint a cat about 20 years ago for a friend's brother, and I found it the other day, the picture of it. So I'll probably upload that just so you can kind of see how in 20 years, hopefully I've gotten better. But again, there's a lot of just layer building, especially for her fur, that trying to figure out the best way to bring all that color out that's going to be in a believable kind of way. I do have slippery fingers. I drop my brush. My grip doesn't always hold very well. And that really kept me from painting for a really long time. And then I finally was just like, okay, I'm just going to have to figure out how to hold a brush and paint. And, you know, if I drop it, I drop it. Just pick it up and keep going. Okay, so I'm bringing in some of those stripes. Again, that side is darker, but I'm using the same tone on the right side that I am on the left side. So you can see on the right side it looks a lot brighter because it's in shadow, but on the left side it looks like it's darker because the background under it is not as dark. There's a lot of detail work in here, a lot of small paint marks. Sometimes my brush was getting a little too full, so I have to stop, clean it off. And then you can see kind of where some of the thinner lines are coming out, and then they get thicker again, and I have to go clean my brush again. Putting in a little bit of white with yellow just for some highlighting. And then toning it in with some of that peachy orange color that I made, because she does have, again, she's just a lot of color in her. And I want to make sure that the front part of her body and her face matches a lot of that underpainting that I created for her body and for the rest of her legs. There's some major highlighting there from the sun hitting her fur and then kind of shining through it, since it is lighter in that area. So having to work that back and forth a couple of different times. I'm kind of glad I'm just doing this in a time lapse right now, because it is a little tough to sit through 5 hours of a video. So if you paint pets and you paint pet portraits and you've been doing it for a while, or just are starting out and learning, let me know what you think. And if you have questions or even suggestions, I'll take it. Anything that can help me and help me improve and help my viewers, help our to improve would be awesome. I did realize it was really bright, so I started bringing the tone back down on there, bringing in some more burnt sienna and burnt umber mixed up in there, getting some higher contrast for her face with some yellow and white, and then a little bit of the black and to gray it out a little bit. This is kind of one area where I did put in a little bit of black and white together, but I did make sure to tone it with some yellow ochre or burnt sienna, so that it wasn't quite just a flat gray. There's some really strong highlights over by on that particular foot, so just making sure I bring all that in, build some of those layers. A lot of fine detailing with these brushes. You can see where my fingers are really close to the ferrule there, because I'm trying to keep in the control. So for this one, I lost my computer screen. So you're going to notice that I have advanced quite a bit on her face. I had something happen with my camera and it turned off, and I was only seeing my palette double on there. So I did add a lot of her striping in on her forehead, and I'm adding to that. I lightened up her nose area really quickly, really brightly. So you're going to see that some of it's just way too bright and way too dark, and we're going to have to work on fixing that. But I am bringing in some of those stripes. She has a lot of patterning on her head, which I find really beautiful, and so I'm adding all of the highlights and the midtones to there just to make sure that I can um, really showcase that part of her face. She just has some beautiful coloring there. And I just love the way her ears are turning out with the glowing whites there, bringing in some of the shadows in the shading in her ear and then under her chin, making sure to round that out and add the markings that she has that are trailing around her neck from her cheek on down. So I haven't worked too much on her body, and I'll get to that in a little bit. I spent a lot of time putting in a lot of fine details here because of her nose and her eyes and just the curvature of her face. Um, I worked a lot with the liner brushes and the smaller rounds, the 0, the 2 round that I had, just to build an individual, the individual fur. So the hairs there, I was like almost doing them one at a time. And there you can see my palette. It's actually flipped around backward. I will probably notice in a second and fix it. And then I got out my comb brush because it was taking so long. I was like, okay, let's go bigger here. Let's go bigger or go home. And so I've got into my darks and I'm really putting them in, and I am taking that brush and just using it to the best of my ability. When you use this comb brushes, like I mentioned earlier, you need to clean them out quite often. They get gummy and dried, and then the individual bristles start sticking together. You can kind of see somewhere in the center there where it was really thick in the darker areas because I needed to clean out my brush some more. I'm really able to fill in her fur really fast here. So I put in those dark stripes, went into with some mid-tone, some of that yellow ochre, and then I'm going to start adding some highlights in there as well, just really mixing in those colors because it's the way they are on her fur. Going back and forth as I find that I need to, add some more. And so this is actually moving along a lot faster than her legs and her face did. And that's just curving, I love the way that her fur was coming out right there. Curving that brush, I went back into her chest area to kind of work in some of that, some of the highlights there. As I got more confident in it, I was like, oh, okay, I can come back in and try these smaller areas that I was struggling with earlier. And you can see really just that she's fluffing up so much there, um, making sure that I get those nice brighter areas going on there. I did lighten up that area right around her legs and feet. Those will probably get painted out and have to be put back in a little bit later. Since that fur that's on her belly is closer than the fur in her leg, um, I will have to go back in and repaint those at some point. Usually you want to paint from back to front, especially when you have objects that are layered over each other, and fur, you want to keep that in mind. I mean, I've been painting just back and forth, but towards the end I'm going to have to paint that tail and then the foot in front of it, making sure I get the edging in correctly, and then the other foot, the fur that's in the belly, and then the foot that's in front of that, and some of the fur of the belly is over the other foot. So just being mindful that you might paint some things out and you're going to have to just put them back later. Putting some more of that peachy coloring that's in her belly and on part of her face there. Little too much water there. I'll have to clean that up in a minute. But I needed some really, really nice lines, and so making a very fluid paint is kind of essential for me. And back in the fine liner, especially right there around the tail and the foot, because they're very small areas that I need to get to. I've got both a dark and a white kind of mix there on my brush. So as it streaks, the dark will streak and then the white light will streak right next to it, and it really does do some really nice effects if you can get the paint on both sides of your brush that way. I did watch a video where they were it was how to paint dog fur video, and they talk about, normally you want to put your darks and then you put your midtones and then you put your lights on there. And for solid color fur, that's a really good strategy. For this mixed tone fur, however, this cat, she was really a challenge. Maybe if I find another video, I might go sit and look and see how another artist did it. But for me, what's really worked was just going, back and forth and layering as I went, knowing that this dark was over this light and this light was over this dark, and mixing those tones in there kind of helped me really shape her fur. And then just those really fine highlights and details on the tips of her fur where it was getting hit by the light was really helpful. Shading a little bit on there where the foot's going to be touching the ground, and making sure I put in those shadows. So you can see here that I am working mostly with the liner at this point because I'm really building up those highlights. And then you can see in the fur that I started at the bottom by her toes and then worked my way up, which is the same concept of working from the back to the front, because I knew that the fur by her toes is going to be under the fur that's further up her leg. And then doing the same thing again. I'm going up and up and up towards her body, just so that I can keep the fur in the correct layers. Adding in some shadows where her feet are going to be, casting shadows from that light that's behind her, and then kind of smoothing them out a little bit, leaving some of that green tone in there just so that she doesn't look like a little cutout, and she's blended a little bit, cleaning up some of the wet areas that I had made earlier. Trying this comb brush right here along her legs was a little bit of a challenge. You can see that I turned it to the corner to try to get some straighter lines there, not using the whole comb brush. And then putting those lights over those darks. I did switch back and forth between brushes quite often. I do have a couple different brands. The Simply Simmons is a hard synthetic, and it can be really springy, and when you use it, the paint kind of, you can almost make like scraped lines with it because it's so stiff that it pushes the paint out. And then the black pearls are a little bit softer, and so that one will put paint down like right where the bristle is, and so it makes kind of like a more definite mark on it. And so just back and forth, I was trying to see what was the best way to create the lines of the fur. A softer bristle with a really soft touch and a little bit of water can create some really nice thin lines. So you'll see that I'm using the black pearls quite often on here. I went back to her fur on her face because she does have some really nice highlights towards the top there. And I lost some of them when I was doing midtones earlier. Refining her eyes, making them a little bit brighter, look a little bit more translucent, tracing the outline, of her eyes better to bring them back in. I noticed that one of her eyes looked like it had gone a little bit crooked, and so I needed to make sure that I bring the shape back, especially in conjunction with her nose, so she didn't look like she was disjointed. So here I pulled out my little 3-0 Silver Sterling Studio round. This particular line is, I believe, used for miniatures, for people who like to do those little resin or metal cast miniatures. So they're very small brushes, and I really like them for fur. So I'm using this 3-0 here right now to kind of put in some individual strands and define the patterning on her face, on her forehead. Right here we're putting in the really fine details of the little V or M that she's got on her face, right between her eyes, fixing the cheek and defining it a little bit. I wanted to make sure that the contrast between the fur in the back and the cheek were really well done. I add a little bit more of that yellowish orange tone to her, just because I feel like she got a little grayed out. Again, more highlighting, starting from the bottom, going back up, making sure that I'm covering the fur in the correct layers. Adding paint often just so that it's not getting goopy and dried out on me. And I am in the liner here, so you can see I'm using that longer liner or rigger brush. Making sure to go over her little foot there. I think it had gotten a little grayed out, too grayed out for my taste. It's bringing in some more highlights. And I just realized that the little picture-in-picture caption is kind of in the way of where I was painting there. I think there's a lot for people to learn when we're trying to create YouTube videos, and I'll have to keep that in mind the next time I record this way. Come back over here and make sure that I get the features on her nose. Coming around her eye, defining that up a little bit more. Making sure I put in some midtones there for those transitions. And then some highlights as well. I want to say Tobi's definitely been more of a challenge she was to work on, especially getting the transitions from the darks to the midtones to the highlights correct, because she just has so much color in her. I really want to say that I want to feel that her, that the eyes were pretty simple, but her chest area, I ended up doing really well on that, and bringing in some of the color that you could not see in the original picture. If I could go back, I probably would work a little bit more on the front paws just to make sure that they were even in tone. And I might do that at a later date, but for now I think I'm really happy with just how this is turning out. I'm going to darken this left side up a little bit, making sure that it does look good with the shadows before I do the rest of the background, because right now the background is still sitting in the underpainting stage. I am getting to um, do the back again, doing a very dark line. I want her sitting somewhere. So for this one, the area where she's sitting is going to be darker because there will be some light that's going to be cast from the window that's in the wall behind her. And so I'm darkening all of that up first, and then we'll put in some highlighting. I did go back to a larger bright there. Once I had the dark areas, I wanted to go and paint some of the fur that is just sticking out from the side of her body. Doing a lighter color in the background, getting some layers. Kind of took my napkin and got some things taken off there. Putting in some of those highlights from the sun. And I'm going to smooth those out. Just getting a couple of final touches, and then, if I wasn't happy with something, I just grabbed that napkin and wiped it off and fixed it up. Putting in her whiskers with the liner brush and the rigger. A lot of water there really helps, making sure that if you have the high flow acrylic, I would use that. For this one, I was using my student grade, so I was adding a lot of water and a lot of glazing gloss to it. And then just some touch-ups in the shadows underneath her body, making sure to have that dark area. And it's pretty much where we are today. Thank you for joining me, and I hope you enjoyed this painting video. If you have any questions, any comments, any suggestions, I appreciate it. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And if there's some other type of content you'd like to see, again, go to my Facebook page and make Contreras Artist Life, or leave a comment here on the video. Thank you.